Chapter 11, Cybercrime and IT Security. This is part 2 of 4, Computer Exploits. The learning outcomes include: explore the potential for IT security threats to negatively impact the organization. Identify and evaluate U.S. laws that provide some protection against IT security threats. Let's look at a simplified view of malware, which at its most basic level is something that tries to damage your computer. Malware includes viruses, Trojan horses, rootkits, worms, spyware, crimeware, and adware, among others. We start with viruses. A virus is programming code disguised as something else. A virus causes unexpected behavior in computers, networks, and information assets. Viruses spread to other machines when you or another user opens an infected email and downloads an infected program or visits an infected website. You ever get an email asking you to click here to reset your password? Make sure the URL is correct prior to clicking on the link. Do you ever get notice that a Microsoft Office document may be dangerous? You may enable editing if you choose to do so, but there may be macros in the document that may infect other documents and master templates. Only enable editing if it's your own document or another person's document and you are confident it doesn't contain a macro virus. This short YouTube video does a good job of introducing the difference between viruses, worms, and Trojan horses, and I encourage you to take a look if you get a chance. Trojan horse is another type of exploit you may have heard of, and it seems like it's a regular, normal, or harmless program, but it can do things like wipe out your hard drive, corrupt your files, it can remotely control your computer, and from that, launch attacks against other computers. It can steal passwords, social security numbers, other personal information, and it can spy on you. The logic bomb is very similar. It executes when something happens. A specific date is reached, a certain number of files are opened, whatever it might be. It executes at that time in an unexpected manner. We've all seen something like this. Congratulations, you won. Click here. If it sounds too good to be true, we know it probably is. However, even the most computer-savvy person can get fooled by some of the emails or messages that are received. You want to have good protection on your computer and be as vigilant as possible. Another type of exploit you don't hear about as much is a rootkit exploit. And with this, the user is able to get into the system and gets administrator level access without consent. And here they can do many things at the code level. They can execute files, they can access logs, they can monitor or spy on users, they can change the computer's configuration, change its password, its access, cause havoc on an organization. This is one part of a blended threat, and it's hard to know when it's occurred at your organization. You can see a diagram that illustrates this. The attacker goes in, finds a vulnerability, uploads a file, and then gains control of the target. A worm is another type of exploit that you've probably heard of. It stays in a computer's memory and recreates itself. It can spread without human intervention if it's on your system. It may have a negative impact. It's much like the virus. It may or may not have a large detrimental effect.
You can lose data, you can lose productivity if you're trying to recover something that was lost, and it may be costly to get rid of the worm to repair and restore the system to working order. Here is an example of a worm, and a worm seeks out a system that does not protect against whatever vulnerability they're trying to exploit. If the system is protected, then it doesn't get to that system. It may, however, get to that system later through an email attachment, through a removable device, through a bring your own device that was brought to work, and then it may get on the network. The best thing to do is obviously have the updated security on your device you're using. Identity theft is an exploit that we've all probably heard about. We all may have even experienced part or portions of an identity theft worry when our credit cards were breached at Target, at Home Depot, our Blue Cross Blue Shield, wherever it might be. Your identity has probably been compromised, at least part of it, at some point, and probably will be again. This is when someone steals your information, uses it without your permission. A data breach often accompanies this, like happened at Home Depot, like happened at Target. And this is where sensitive data is unintentionally released to unauthorized people. Typically, a site that you buy from online will use security HTTPS to try to protect your information, but don't assume that will protect it. One other thing to remember is that although credit cards do have the security protection on the websites that you buy from, oftentimes your email address and your password to log in are not similarly protected. This actually happened to me, where I used my email address and my Gmail password for one account, and they broke into my Gmail account, then went to Facebook and said they forgot the password. It was sent to Gmail, and they took over my Facebook. This happened for about 4 hours before it was at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning. So it can happen, and since then I do my very best not to use the same user ID or passwords as any of my emails. Fortunately, my Kennesaw email was not compromised. At this time, I encourage you to pause the PowerPoint presentation and look at a couple of identity theft stories. Cyberespionage is another exploit that is on the rise, where a company or a competitor gathers data about someone else and tries to use it, so they're spying. It may be done with malware, with social engineering, with any of the other exploits we talked about here, and they try to steal something that's of value. It might be new product development. It might be how your processes work, something that's innovative that really works well for you. It might be personal information about your employees, as happened with the Sony hack that occurred recently. Or it might be information about agreements you have with partners and special arrangements you might have that you'd prefer not to share with your competitors. Cyber terrorism is really more of a concern at the national level, although the Sony attack came very close to being a terroristic attack, and in fact the FBI was called in to investigate. And this is where intimidation of a government by using IT to disable critical national infrastructure for political, religious, or ideological gains. For instance, someone may try to gain access to the electrical grid and cause power disruptions. may try to gain access to the stock exchange so that trading has to stop. There are many reasons that, or many things that could happen, and many underlying reasons for this. It's something our government tries to protect against, understanding that the cyber terrorists, just like the hackers, are always trying to exploit any vulnerability. We do have Homeland Security and the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, both of which try to prevent these acts of terrorism and try to come in and help when something has happened like this.
Finally, let's talk about spam. Have you heard of spam? Have you ever gotten spam email? How many spam messages have you gotten this week, today, in the last hour? It's a nuisance for most of us. Merriam-Webster defines spam as unsolicited, usually commercial email sent to a large number of addresses. If your email addresses are compromised, they may be used to make users believe they are receiving legitimate email messages, as shown in this attack. You have to protect yourself from these problems, or your customers may find someone else who can protect them. The United States is generally an opt-out country. That is, users have to specifically opt out by request or virtually uncheck the box to receive a newsletter, for instance. While canned spam says it is legal to spam in the U.S., spammers must not disguise their identity, the emails must be specifically labeled as spam or shopping, and the recipient must be able to unsubscribe in the future if desired. With spam becoming more of a problem, websites are beginning to use tests to make sure it's an actual human being making a request and not a bot. You may have seen these tests where you have to physically check a box or enter letters or numbers or select pictures or add numbers. Regardless, spam is and continues to be a problem, and it's not going away any more than junk mail has gone away. Now let's turn to phishing. Most people naturally want to be helpful. Sometimes you can be too helpful, however. This diagram shows what might happen in a phishing attack. In its simplest form, phishing is a way to fool people so that they give you confidential, private, or proprietary information. Once confidential information is retrieved, the attacker may try to identify others in your network to try to con them into giving even more information. In the Equifax breach in mid-2017, Equifax directed its customers to a website to determine if their account had been compromised. Turns out the website didn't go where they thought it would go, and customers who simply went to check and make sure everything was okay might find themselves the victims of a hacker, a phishing attack. From phishing attacks, other types of malware might emerge, from spam to cyberespionage.
Another exploit is a distributed denial of service attack. And with this, a hacker takes over computers, takes over unsuspecting user computers, and sends multiple messages to a site trying to keep it busy. So legitimate users can't get in and do anything. And this has happened to many websites. Sony, one of the more recent ones, just flooded with requests, so it effectively shut the network down. In this case, the hackers use botnet computers, also called zombies, not to be confused with The Walking Dead zombies. But here, computers are controlled by hackers, lots and lots of users, and they, from remote locations without consent, and it's sent to whatever organization the hackers are trying to flood. It also can be used to distribute spam and to distribute worms, viruses, Trojan horses, logic bombs that we already talked about. You can see illustrated here a distributed denial of service attack with one attacker is using multiple user IDs from all over the country to target one particular server organization.
U.S. laws, although insufficient to protect your information assets, do provide a few options to prosecute those who may harm your networks. First is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which makes it illegal to access a computer without explicit authorization from the owner of the technology and/or information asset. If you try to exceed the authorization level that you are approved to view, you may be convicted under CFAA. Intent does not matter, so even if you unintentionally access something for which you do not have approval, CFAA could be used to prosecute you at the federal level. Numerous states have similar laws which go beyond CFAA. Georgia, for instance, recently passed State Bill 315, which tries to make it more difficult for unauthorized users to access information assets for which they do not have approval. Security researchers, however, fear the reprisals that may come to them for legitimate work. The Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act protects against unauthorized use of credit cards. In most cases, we, the consumers, are not responsible for charges made on our credit cards without our approval. Finally, the controversial USA Patriot Act defines terrorism and penalties for violations. The Patriot Act was passed shortly after 9/11 to try to prevent a similar heinous act from occurring in the future. Opponents of the act believe it goes too far and compromises our right to freedom of speech. Law enforcement agencies, however, commend the act for allowing more sharing between agencies in an effort to stop cyber terrorism before it occurs. To summarize, people with bad intentions will access your company's information assets. People with good intentions may also access your company's information assets, either by accident or as an ethical hacker or for other reasons. There are some laws in place in the U.S. and other countries that help with prosecution of those who access and/or damage information assets. However, the company should not rely upon these laws as the sole method of protection.